The second thing that I really wanted to really talk about, which is the notion of the competitions. And whenever you put a photo in for a competition, who's judging it makes all the difference as to how well it's going to succeed. And if we go back to Roy's photos are going in for an Amateur Photographer of the Year competition. And for that, you're going to have proper judges. You will have people judging who are professional photographers. And professional photographers look at photos in a different way than amateur photographers, beginner photographers, and non-photographers. And if you think about that, then it makes a huge difference, because I've got photos which have won prizes when judged by expert photographers, and have failed abysmally in crowd voting scenarios. So things like Guru Shots, Photo Crowd, Viewbug is another, and I think there's quite a few different sites online where you can set up your portfolio. You have competitions daily, weekly, hourly. You put in your photos, and it's quite a fun thing to do. I think it's worth having a go at, even if you've never tried. You can, just set up a little account, and most of them are free to begin with, at least. Enter the competitions, because it becomes really quite interesting seeing how other people see your photos. Now, you also have to kind of allow for the fact your ego is likely to get quite bruised because of exactly this whole problem of what Russ opened this with, which is, I've got quite a good photo here, how come it's not doing very well? You have to understand that crowd voting is different to expert voting. And even within expert voting, site to site has different ideas of what they want. Lens culture is another one where a lot of status goes with that. Some very high-ranking people well-respected judges go on that. They have a particular style that wins. Whenever they do portraits, they have what I always jokingly call with my wife, melancholic stillness. The winners are never people in action. They're never people really engaging with the camera. They're people who are sort of looking very still, maybe slightly wistful, maybe slightly melancholic. Well, it is melancholic, yeah. Sad or wounded or something. But they're very rarely looking directly into the camera, and they're very rarely doing anything. They tend to be sitting still. So if you're trying to do well in a lens culture competition, you want to go for something like that. If you're going for Sports Monthly, you don't want stillness, you want action. So the first thing to understand about competitions is what's the theme, and make sure you match the theme. But also the other thing is who's judging. Now, when you come to the things like the crowd voting, one of the really interesting things that I've discovered is there's two things that can play against you in crowd voting competitions. One is black and white. Unless it is specifically a black and white competition, colour photos nearly always do better. The second is portrait versus landscape. Unless it is specifically a portrait style competition, landscapes nearly always do better. Now, running on the back of your question with this, Russ, I went to Guru Shots this morning, and I looked at the last 10 competition winners. And there's two sets of winners. There's the winners chosen by the crowd vote and the winners chosen by the guru who set that particular competition. So out of the last competition, essentially we have 20 winners. Out of those 20 winners, none were portrait in format, one was square, one was black and white. 19 were colour, 19 were in landscape format. Now, to understand that, you have to think about the way people are voting. And if they are voting with a screen, and especially if they're voting with a desktop screen rather than just off that. Let me just show you screenshots. Here's screenshots from, now this is Guru Shots, and I've just done a couple of different screenshots from my own things, right? And when you look at this, what leaps out? What leaps out immediately is colour. Here's another one. And here, what you notice is that because of the way it goes, a landscape shot is taking up more of the screen. A portrait shot isn't taking up as much. A black and white portrait shot is kind of getting lost. A landscape shot with fire flames on it grabs the attention. And so it kind of goes on. If we take a look at a shot like this, I mean, what immediately grabs all the attention is the bright orange up in the top right corner. And if I'm going in for a competition called Orange, that's a really good one to have, because it's orange and it's an orange in an orange competition. That would probably score quite highly. Subtlety, if I went in for orange and I put in these leaves underneath, I wouldn't score anything like as well. Doesn't matter the fact that actually I think these leaves are more interesting photo than that orange. It doesn't, for people who are skimming quickly, it's less noticeable. This picture here of a couple of, I've suddenly forgotten the word, kind of like acrobats on the ribbons. Somebody will remember. Put it in the comments to let me know. Is an interesting photo if you have time to examine it. But if you are spending half a second on it as you're flipping through the images, you're not going to notice. Here's another one, where again, brightness is what's grabbing your attention. Black and white portrait is not. Let me just show you something here as well, which is what you really need to know is if people are looking at a screen with multiple pictures on. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to filter blur. Okay, let's just take this and blur it. Okay, let's blur it up to a point whereby, okay, you can see that there's sort of shapes within it, but you can't see what they are anymore. Okay, and then let's just, I've done this before for other reasons, but let's just transform, rotate 100 degrees, 180 degrees. Now, when you look at that, where you're just instantly just seeing a massive blob and colour, what's grabbing your attention? And what's grabbing your attention are this bright orangey patch here, little yellow patch here, patch of purple there. Anything that's black and white, grey, has got lost. It's not really grabbing our attention. So when we come back here, what's grabbed the attention? This pile of logs hasn't grabbed the attention. This flower, the purple flower, not too bad. The sort of brighter colours behind here, that's not too bad. But the black and white pictures haven't. This little one of the boat here, which, is actually quite, as a photo, I quite like it. There's lots of texture in the wood and all the rest of it. But in Guru Shots, it never gets a look in. So that's really what I wanted to try and get across to you, Russ, and to anybody else who's entering competitions, is it's not necessarily the best photo that wins. It's the photo that grabs the attention that wins. If you've got the crowd vote and people are scrolling through hundreds of these photos to vote, they're doing it at high speed, anything subtle gets missed. If you're in a competition that said red, make sure you've got something red on a red background. It's as red can be. Even if it's a black and white competition, make sure you've got a strong contrast between the lights and the darks so it grabs the attention. So it's a tricky thing that sometimes the best the photos that I get the most wins out of, or the best scoring out of, aren't necessarily the photos that I consider to be my best work. Quite often there's work which I feel is kind of slightly mediocre and isn't the stuff that I would necessarily show off to the rest of the world normally. but it can do particularly well because it's brighter, it's simpler, it's not as subtle, and so it scores better in those kind of competitions. So I hope that makes sense, Russ, and I hope that makes sense to the rest of you as well, is to understand that your photo, if you're wondering why it's doing well or it's not doing well, you've got to understand who's looking at it. And once you understand who's looking at it and how they are looking at it, so like on a screen with multiple images which they are scrolling through at high speed, then you realise that subtlety gets lost. If you are alternatively handing over an image to somebody who is going to be studying this in great detail, they're going to be looking at the technical, did you blow out the highlights, can I see the sharpness of the eyes, you know, is there a narrative in here which is really engaging? Then you've got to make sure you have all those kind of things right, you know. So something like your horse and dog picture, lovely picture, I can imagine in something like a camera club setting would do really well. I can imagine in particular competitions where you have, you know, judges and it's called animals and animal interactions, it would do really well. In a crowd site where it's portrait and it's black and white and it takes you more than a moment to really read what's going on, not a chance. So it doesn't surprise me that what you've got is a good photo that isn't really doing well. So hopefully then, Russ, that kind of answers that question, and for the rest of you it kind of gives you some ideas about why photo competition, how they work, and you can use this to understand, to actually start scoring really well. It doesn't necessarily make you a great photographer as in the way that good photographers would go, other photographers would go, wow, that's a great image, but you can score your points. So there's another thing here, which is, what are you really wanting out of your photo? If you want the thumbs up from mass voting, then be simple, be direct, be unsubtle. If you want the respect of your peers, then you need to be understanding your diagonals, understanding your technicals, understanding your balance of light and dark and shades and everything else. So anyway, thought that was interesting. Hope you found it interesting. So if you found this useful, let your friends know and hit subscribe.